Here is a presentation on the conclusion to the Critique of Practical Reason by Immanuel Kant. Two things give Kant reverence and admiration. One is the starry heavens above, and two, the moral law within. The starry heavens bind Kant contingently to unbounded worlds and physical existence across scales of time and space. They annihilate his importance as an animal creature. Earth is a mere speck in this expanse, and as Kant is an animal, one gives back its matter to the earth after a short time. In contrast, the moral law within has a necessary and universal connection. Kant perceives the abstract space of moral law to be immediately before him, despite being universal. This moral law reveals a life independent of animality and of sensible or empirical, and grants Kant a purposeful determination of his life in a way that is necessary, universal, and can transcend even his particular life to go on to the infinite. The overall effect Kant perceives this having on him is to infinitely raise his worth as an intelligence. Kant wonders how do we motivate ourselves to inquire on morality given the sublimity of the object of inquiry, the moral law itself. Kant gives a sad counterexample of astronomy and physics ending in astrology and superstition. Nonetheless, Kant reasons that reason, if it follows correct methodology, cannot misstep but derive the truth of morals and universal law. He gives a brighter instance of our derivation of physical laws. Using reason, we found the unchangeable laws of physics. Likewise, we may apply the successful method to morality. He suggests we observe, record, and analyze examples of human behavior as science had with physical bodies, reduce the behaviors and judgments to the elementary parts, and find the both empirical and rational parts in pure states. Further experimentation may tell what these parts can do in and of themselves, which would allow one to construct behavioral complexes from these parts successfully. As science, mathematics, and chemistry prevented errors, this method, when applied to morality, should be error-free, reasons Kant. As to the meaning of the leaps of genius, using the philosopher's stone, finding visionary treasures but throwing out true treasures, I think of an allusion to the idea Jack Nicholson vocalizes, "You can't handle the truth." So a genius, according to Kant, keeps the visionary truths that are sensitive to tender areas of knowledge, while disposing of those too coarse and blunt, yet true. Kant believes that his proposed science is the narrow gate that leads to the doctrine of wisdom. Teachers ought promote this wisdom, and philosophy ought act as a guardian for this process. Here I think of Hannah Arendt's paper on the banality of evil, in which she proposes that philosophy act as the guardian against banal or commonplace evil, just as Kant says teachers must teach the wisdom and philosophy guard the way against evil. This finishes my summary of Kant's conclusion to a critique of practical reason. A main error I find in Kant's idea of using science to find the universal morality is that science is generally strictly descriptive, not prescriptive. Morality, on the other hand, is specifically prescriptive. With science, we can say that if we have state A and we apply experimental manipulation X, the difference between the resultant state of A and of A plus X is due to X, and A and X may be about human behavior. So, we can reach, given science, a complete description of moral choices' effects on human worlds, but still have no way to morally prefer one state over another. This requires a moral prescription. Kant would believe that the moral imperative is a matter to be deduced by pure reason. If this is the case, Kant can find, given any state A, the correct and universally right manipulation Y to transform the world optimally according to pure reason, and to do this with absolute universal impact. So, if abstract situation A is found simpliciter, the universally right manipulation Y is categorically imperative to be enacted so as to bring about the morally right change of circumstances. Confirming this, Kant goes on to say the resultant doctrine of wisdom from his science of morality does tell one what ought to be done and that teachers ought to teach it. This seems to be an affirmation of his belief in reason to universally tell the right path, given any situation. Here are some comments on Kant's conclusion to his critique of practical reason. When gazing at the stars, he thinks there are a countless multitude of them, but he does not think this infinity is comparable to the infinity of the abstract universal moral law. The universal moral law is a form of the universal and necessary, and therefore applicable to all times and all places. The arrangement of the stars above Kant are possibly a number that is, as one counts them, ever increasing, but the difference in meaning between the infinity of the stars and the infinity of something abstract, universal, necessary is one of the difference between a number and the absolute. Kant's moral law always applies. One could simply say the moral law, as it would continue to and forever has been existing beyond Kant's life. There is Professor Neyra's comment on what it means to be moral. I think what he was getting at was the difference between rote performance of moral behaviors and understanding the moral reasoning behind why one acts the way one does. The first is like conforming to some law, religious or otherwise. The latter is truly understanding the moral reasoning behind why one acts the way one does in a given situation and then acting that out. In contrast, one may act according to a rule set, such as a religious law, not of one's own derivation and not knowing why one follows these rules. This is not being moral in the sense of what Professor Neyra means, nor probably Kant. To be moral is to understand correct moral reasoning and then act on it. This reminds me of Aristotle's virtue theory. To be virtuous is not only to act in accordance with the virtues, but to both feel the correct emotions and act virtuously. Both Kant and Aristotle require correct behavior, and both require something additional, a visceral emotional component in the case of Aristotle, and intellectual understanding in the case of Kant. There is the inevitable comparison of feelings of insignificance among an animal creature the size of Earth and the size of our solar system, both from the point of view of Kant and Peter Singer. Kant thinks the Earth and animals on Earth are a mere speck in contrast to the size of the universe, while gazing at the infinity of the stars. Likewise, the length of life of an animal, taking in matter and then giving it back to the Earth, is nothing in comparison to the temporal infinities of the universe. Kant's way of dealing with this is to find that he can engage in a universal and necessary process of correct behavior by communing with the necessary abstract and universal forms that logically follow from one another given pure reason. He, in fact, finds himself engaging with the higher, larger infinity of moral necessity than that of the stars or the inverse of Earth's size in comparison to the size of the universe. As Kant saw the Earth as a mere speck, Russell saw our solar system as an infinitesimal speck, within which is Earth, a microscopic dot. Sagan saw Earth as a pale blue dot on the image taken by the Voyager space probe in 1990. Like Kant, Russell saw human life as coming from disorganized carbon, crawling for a bit, only to return to the Earth a short while later. For Russell, our insignificance disproved the existence of a caring, omnipotent creator. Kant overcame our insignificance through connection to the universal moral law. Russell believed we must be liberated from our fears of littleness by facing the truth. Both Russell and Sagan found meaning from our littleness, overcoming nihilism. I have an interesting analogy to make of Arendt in view of Kant to close this commentary. Arendt writes that secularization and emancipation of the modern age is a turning away from the Father of all those in heaven and the Mother of all those living under the sky. Arendt mentions the Sputnik satellite being launched from Earth into the sky above us. There is an interesting interpretation given Kant's opening to his conclusion. Kant speaks of the starry sky above and the moral firmament in front of us. Perhaps the launch of Sputnik is an analogy for our trajectory from being earthbound, morally practical, and living under the sky to being Kantian, morally ideal, and following reason to the stars above, becoming like gods, and reaching the infinite heavens through the actual infinite path of universal morality. This is, as Kant says, a transcendent region, beyond my horizon, yet to be known and discovered. I guess, at least to some of us.